The reinvention of ninjutsu in the modern era is not possible, for the functions of a shinobi no mono of history are today carried out by three-letter agencies, computer and internet technology specialists, and a wide variety of local, state, and federal intelligence assets. Any reinvention of ninjutsu in such an environment would prove the art as redundant, anachronistic, dangerous, and impractical. However, there is still a path of training in the ways of the shinobi that could enhance the life of the student. At the outset, we must recognize that recreating ninjutsu to match its historical environment is impossible. Times have changed, and therefore the only path of study that makes any sense from a pragmatic perspective is to take the timeless principles of ninjutsu and adapt them to comport with the modern period. This notion is validated by antiquated authors of the extant ninjutsu texts, insomuch that they would speak of the need to change their techniques with the passage of time to keep in step with battlefield novelty. In this video, I will further explain the path of ninjutsu study known as the path of adaptation, which studies ninjutsu to distill principles that can be used to formulate practical applications in the modern era. I will do this by providing you with principles derived from the texts and showing you examples of their application today. Let's begin with the principle of threat awareness. Shinobi were indeed familiar with the threats to political power and their own personal security. This is obvious when one considers that the vital function of spies is to provide awareness of threats to their lord or employer. An adaptation of this principle might require an education in national security wherein one would become acquainted with internal and external threats to the state and public, ranging from natural hazards and disasters to man-made weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, international crime, cyber threats, black swan events, and nuclear proliferation. The student would learn to apply the core security objectives of prevention, protection, response, mitigation, and recovery to his or her own life, perhaps even going so far as to set up a disaster response framework and emergency preparedness posture to follow in the event of exigent circumstances. Like the shinobi of old, ninjutsu students would be compelled by this principle to be aware of, understand, and counter criminal threats that percolate through the systems of our modern society. For example, cybersecurity would become a sub-discipline of ninjutsu studies to inform and protect against phishing, man-in-the-middle, and spoofing, along with a host of other cyber-mediated attacks that impact the common person and businesses every day. This principle of threat awareness would beckon one to harness observation and haptics or body language identification skills to be better suited to sensing ill intentions from others. Threat awareness would also call on the development of OSINT, or open source intelligence conduits, such as the news and chatter on social media, to garner an idea of what's going on around the student. This principle goes deep. Now, if you study ninjutsu long enough, at some point you are sure to find that the principle of endurance is basic to the mindset of a shinobi. This principle is most notably alluded to by ninja Fujibayashi Nagato while describing the meaning of the shinobi ideogram. The world can be harsh to us all, and if it knocks you down, you need a motivator to pick yourself back up and keep moving. Life is an endurance game for us all, so learning to endure and find the strength and difficulty that we need is one great lesson that ninjutsu can teach us. When things get heavy, remember this principle and keep going. The next principle I will touch upon is that of language acquisition. Shinobi of the feudal era needed to master regional dialects so that they could better their disguised credibility. The wrong speech could out the shinobi from his cover, hence shinobi were told that speech differs in 66 ways in 66 different provinces and that they should study accordingly. Adaptation of this principle would take the form of studying one or two foreign languages, as well as augmenting the native tongue with greater eloquence and wider vocabulary. The shinobi tradition, known as that of the mosquito and the fly, explains that ninja should show the same kind of discretion in interacting with people from various classes as mosquitoes and flies do. A mosquito cares not whom it draws blood from, and so a shinobi should extract needed information from any human source, be they a drug-addicted homeless person or a warrior of the elevated samurai class. The principle at play here is understanding that human intelligence, or humant, may require interacting with people of every class distinction: the poor, wealthy, educated, uneducated, merchant, fisherman, etc. It is emphasized in this tradition that a shinobi cares not about the social position of an intelligence source, but only how useful information might be acquired from any person. The next principle I will talk about today is that of self-protection that we find implied throughout the writings of the ninja. Shinobi were trained in the fighting arts of their respective families and clans. The arts that they learned were geared towards the nature of feudal conflict, with armor, horses, spears, swords, bows, and other combat technology that the moderner wouldn't really have much use for. Unless you are employed in the government sector or in the military, chances are you won't need to adapt this principle to the extent that you arm yourself with hot weapons to ward off enemies carrying the same. For civilians, the principle of self-protection is useful to the degree that it is applied to modern criminal threats and the internet technology that we all rely on. Again, the student could gain an education in cybersecurity and thereby prevent a variety of attacks, sometimes enhanced with social engineering, that users of IT are vulnerable to. One could also take self-defense courses, focusing on likely scenarios that may call on the use of force. Another way of looking at the principle of self-protection is to see your body as the most essential instrument for any action in this world. Like anything else, it requires care, and protecting it means giving it what it needs to carry out its vital functions. Water, nutrition, and exercise are just as important to a self-protection plan as a knife, a taser, or a gun. Take care of your body. You only get one. The last adapted principle I will touch upon is that of isolation. Shinobi had to be comfortable being alone for long stretches of time. Learning to embrace solitude and being with oneself is something I find value in because it turns the mind inward, allowing one to survey the internal undercurrents of consciousness. This is something spoken about with direct specificity within the Bansen Shukai, that a shinobi must know himself, the emotions, aspirations, pressures, temptations, velleities, and generally how the mind operates. Solitude gives us the opportunity to reflect on the mind in this way. This should give you a clearer picture of what the path of adaptation in ninjutsu studies might look like. The practices developed from the principles of ninjutsu should not be interpreted as ninjutsu itself. However, the adaptation of the principles of the shinobi arts, as has been demonstrated, can be of immense value to the student.